Okay, continue. I will not be leaving after recording. So good morning from my part as well. Main thing, very important during this session, we have a chat and we have a chat monitor, which is Thierry today. Thierry is going to monitor all your annoying questions and you can drop them in the chat or you can unmute and ask the question. Normally, I'm supposed to share my screen and then we jump to start with, at least in a brief presentation. The presentation, indeed, it's a little bit a double topic. It's both CDP and VDRO, which actually is a new name of the product that was known under VAO. And they changed name because it's more like disaster recovery orchestration and more than just availability on its own. Before that, I want to a little bit do a deep dive on the new feature in V11, continuous data protection. The reason why is because in the second part, it's being taken care of as well in the VDRO. So that's the main thing. Now, why should you or could you use actually that CDP version? It is a complete different approach for start. It is a policy actually that allows you to move and, like I would say, replicate virtual machines from one ESX host towards another ESX host. The reason why is, of course, to do a disaster recovery in case something goes completely wrong at one ESX or in one data center. You can think like just one host, or you can think like, oh, error. You can think like just a single node or just a complete data center that you're replicating towards another site. So your secondary site, I know most of the clients in Belgium, because we are not having the biggest customers in the world, are like having a secondary data center at the other side of the parking lot, which is okay-ish, but not perfect, I would say. The big advantage of that is that there's very likely a fiber underneath or alongside of the parking lot. But if you talk about a different data center at another location, chances are pretty big that there is no fiber available from one data center towards the other data center. And so what we see is that in general, the replication that is usually being done by the underlying SAN, which is more or less required to have a fiber in between to replicate the data towards the other data center, is missing. It's going over a normal internet line, I would say, or a leased line or whatever. So there is some latency and SAN replication will become impossible. We used to have something like replicas, but the replicas was a job and it was limited. I will explain that later on based on timing. Now we have CDP, which is continuous data protection. I would say almost continuous data protection because it's not 100% synchronous. It's just about just not synchronous. Yeah. But the biggest advantage is there is no distance limit, just like for the SAN replication. So it might be an ideal replacement for SAN replication. It might also be that your customer is having a SAN. I would say I'm going to name at random two brands. For instance, on one data center, a Tripar, and at the other data center, the old Netapp, which is still running perfectly, but is being reused. You cannot do SAN replication in between two brands of storage. So perfect use case over there as well to implement CDP. So there is the other biggest advantage is, of course, and the last line, there is one product for everything: backup, replication, CDP, archiving, whatever you want, offloading to the cloud, backing up from the cloud and bringing it back on-prem and stuff like that. So everything will be bundled in Veeam, backup, and replication. That's the biggest advantage. And Thierry can talk about those licenses later on. You just need one single license and that's it. When should you use CDP over other kind of replication mechanism? We always claim the top 5%. Why do we say top 5%? Because we look at those enormous big clients that have like thousands of virtual machines, and then you reach more or less the limits of the system. While, as you know, in Veeam, there is always a proxy doing the work in the scene behind. If you size correctly the proxy, you could more or less do whatever you want with the CDP policies, because you would not encounter that maximum limit, at least not in Belgium, I assume. So it is actually a pretty good system. It does, I will show later on in the GUI as well, these type of functionalities, and I'll show you how to create some CDP job or policy. It is easy to fail over to a later stage. Just you create a policy, and once it's created, you just right click and do failover. Add to the failover plan if you want to create a plan. There are two ways of CDP things. First of all, you do not need to do anything else because we like lazy administrators. Lazy administrators are the good administrators. So we always say it is agentless. So you do not need to install an agent inside the virtual machine to be CDP'd to the other side. So there is nothing inside. The only thing that is being published and being used is the vSphere API. We will deploy something and it will become visible in your vSphere. There will be an API, a policy running, a filter driver, in fact, and I will draw that later on the drawing board, how it's working actually. But the thing is, you do not need to do anything at all. And if all goes well, actually the deployment, the complete deployment within Veeam backup and replication can be done with a few clicks, in fact. So it's not utterly annoying to deploy this kind of actually complex systems. Let's jump. We can do stuff with bandwidth, because when there are plenty of changes within the blocks, at the same time, we will just keep track of the change block, and the latest change will be replicated to the other location. That will become. Okay. Oh, David? No, David? No, David. So that will become visible once I start drawing, because
alles op de loop en gewoon binnen. Alles op de loop en gewoon binnen.
Hi. I think somebody has the possibility to mute someone. So the thing is, we can do plenty of things, and with the I/O throttling and the bandwidth controlling as well. It's all being deployed at the proxy. I will show that later on within the GUI. There are plenty of things that need to be known as well. But before, let's jump into the pre-version 11. How did it actually work in the past? So in the past, it was not being called CDP, continuous data protection. No, it was not continuous. That's the biggest summary. It was being called a replica. Replicas are in fact just a copy, I would say, based on a snapshot of the virtual machine. So what do we have? We have a data center over here. We have a data center over here, and we will have a host. Of course, if all goes well, we have a host with a virtual machine. Of course, the virtual machine, just to keep consistency for later on, will have a virtual disk or multiple virtual disks. What we actually do within that replica job, so in Veeam backup and replication, we configure a replica job. Everything is job within Veeam, and this job will start or initiate its things after, for instance, every 20 minutes. That is actually even a best case scenario. I would say the most of the replica jobs that I've seen were done with 1 hour or twice a day, just to have something in the other data center. How is it being done? Well, actually, when this one kicks in, it's going to talk to the host and actually it's going to create a snapshot of the virtual machine. So little picture over here. Then it's going to move that snapshot towards the other data center where there is, of course, also a host. And in the meanwhile, because it's a continuous job that is keep kicking in every 20 minutes or every hour, it will have a VM replica and it will attach that snapshot over here. After that, this snapshot is being removed. 20 minutes later, same process, and it attaches this snapshot once again on the replica machine. You keep building up an archive. There is a limit. Yeah, you can define the limit. For instance, in this example, I will take the limit of 5 snapshots to be kept. Why is that very important? Because CDP does not work with snapshots. There is no history. Yeah? In this case, the history is being kept in snapshots. The biggest, and I would say the biggest advantage of using this replica mechanism is, imagine you got a naughty guy over here, which is very angry, and is going to kick into the environment and is going to encrypt your environment. It is very easy for Veeam to say, well, let's fail over, but let's take this one to become production now, because this one is completely encrypted and this one is completely encrypted. So it will allow you to browse a little back in time and just take out something else. Something else that was being done with the replica jobs, you were able to test your failover scenario because you were able to make some kind of data lab and to use this replica and just test it out. Does it boot actually as it should be? Does it have VMware tools that is replying and stuff like that? Does it have still a network connection? Does those things happen? Does those things work? Funny thing is, you could put a gateway in between and you could have like those expensive consultants which cost a lot of money. They can talk to that replica thing just as they could do the same setup with a backup, in fact. But you can use that replica mechanism to use this as a data lab or a sure backup lab. And this expensive guy can break this complete environment and it didn't harm anything. Not the production storage, not the VBR, but just the secondary data center, which is at that point in time passive running, in fact, doing nothing at all. So it can handle all the IO. Perfect use case. So this is pre-version 11. Let's jump now to not the past, but to the, and certainly not the future, but the present. That was the word I was looking for. How it's being done. I will redraw this one because now one single image it's not very clear. But how it's being done in the scene behind. So it's very good to know that we do actually a lot. In this mechanism, what we do is actually we pinpoint, this is a timeline, this is seconds. So between 1 and 10 seconds, we have something over here. I'm going to make this thing a little bit smaller. Yeah, there it goes. So we have a timeline with seconds, which is okay. We have a virtual machine. We have end users that are actually working on that virtual machine. So things change in the virtual machine. Might be a database, might be a file server, for instance, and you change something on the virtual machine. So the funny thing is, what will happen? Block A is still block A, but over here, block B is being changed. So very important for Veeam to capture, hey, we got a change and we keep track of block B. B is the new thing. At 4 seconds and a half, for instance, we got block A, but there's something else that's being, apart from block B that has been added in the past. Block A is now being changed and now becomes block D. Okay, So perfect. We will keep track in some kind of a file, which is the CDP file, in fact. That block B and D needs to be sent towards the other data center, because over here we have still in the same example DC1 and here DC2. So we will move on this file towards the other location, and we will start inserting this into the virtual machine within the 10 seconds, because 10 seconds is the example that I use for the policy of the CDP. So we will make sure that at second 9, we will make sure that these blocks are actually B and D. Yeah? I will write B like this, then it remains consistent. Now, the first thing that actually, when this was in beta and this was explained a little bit before V11 actually came out in GA version, I got a question, what happens if the network breaks? Now, well, it happens and disasters happen and everything breaks, for instance, at one side and the network is being cut. Well, actually what we do is we keep track of all. At that point in time, we will not capture, because we do not know when the network is being recovered. So the changes, keeping track of all the changes within the files, in fact, will become impossible to do. So what we do is use some kind of CBT file mapping, and we will keep track of the block where A resides was being changed. This block has been changed, and in the meanwhile, our policy is going completely in the red because we're past 10 minutes in the meanwhile, because the network is still not recovered. Yeah, for instance, somebody took a machinery and cut out the line in between the two data centers. So we will just keep track of all the blocks being changed in the virtual machine. Meaning, once the network is being recovered, we can just say, oh, this block, this block, this block, I need to recover. I will recover all those changes. Okay, copy paste, more or less, simplicity, copy paste towards the other location, and then put the blocks at the right place. So it's actually more like the VMware approach, I would say. Over here, we will keep track of the files itself. How do we do that? Well, that's another explanation. So in the same example as I used earlier on, we have two DCs. We will cut them down into pieces with a network. You have somewhere a vCenter. You will have a host. If all goes well, I hope you have more than one virtual machine being hosted at that host. And it has virtual disks. This is step 1. Now, this host has somewhere a SAN or disks inside it, doesn't matter. Over here, you got the same situation. So you got a host and you got a disk or SAN. And this being done, okay, now you deploy actually our CDP policy, and it will deploy some kind of a filter over here. Same thing applies over here. You will see why this one is needed as well. Now we got an end user from somewhere. We don't know where he did, but actually he started working. We got an end user that is working perfect. So he's going to store a document on the virtual machine. On the virtual machine, that means it needs to store things on a virtual disk in this case. So it passes the host. It's being captured at the filter. And at the same time, this data is being duplicated, more or less, and being kept in our CDP file. This one will be hosted at the proxy. Keep that in mind. So what do we need? We need somebody who does the work, in fact, at Veeam. So we will need a proxy that handles this file, that handles all those changes. In the meanwhile, those changes are being written over there at the SAN, not yet over here, because we will, in the same example, we will keep this file alive more or less 5 seconds because our policy is 10 seconds. Yeah? At that point in time, we will start copy pasting after those 5 seconds because we know it takes some time to copy paste over the network towards the other location. This one will be picked up by a proxy as well, who hosts actually a CDP file, and we will replay those changes into the filter. So basically, it will go to the virtual machine with a disk, and the changes are being sent both to the SAN, and thus they appear in the virtual disk. So actually, this is the system that more or less the flow, how it's being working. Of course, why do we need that proxy to be available at the other side? Once you do a failover to this one, to the replica, in fact, then you need to be capable of capturing all the changes as well over here and bring things back online at the left side. So it's a system that goes from the left to the right and from the right to the left. Situations like active, everything is possible. Best approach, selecting VMs by VMs or groups by groups, it doesn't matter. If you want to use tags, for instance, good for me as well. The biggest advantage of tags is that they will or can be reused, in fact, in VDRO. Yeah? We got plenty of cool things as well. For me, at least, I think the most important thing is the RPO reporting. So it's something that is going to appear within the browser that is going to say, hey, well, the RPO is, for instance, it exceeded. So it become orange, and after a while, now this example is perhaps not perfect, and 2 seconds and 3 seconds, but perhaps after 10 seconds, it's a complete error and mark it as completely red. So it will appear visible for the administrators. Now, I already mentioned a few times the thing of a replica. A replica can have, I explained this one, as you can mount things like in data labs, you can do file recovery as well. And it's being supported by Cloud Connect. At this point in time, Cloud Connect does not support CDP. File recovery not possible because we don't mount those things, so data labs is as well excluded. And a planned failover can only be done with VDRO. And that's the reason why there is the second subject, in fact, of the partner academy today. Now, I'll keep this one. So if all goes well, I'm still connected. Perfect. I have a Veeam deployment from home. It's my massive infrastructure, I would say. I have not the ability to move from one vCenter towards another vCenter in 2 separate locations, do some throttling, because everything is on the same device, in fact. So I sub-virtualized some ESX hosts in order to do this, this demo, in fact. What do we have as a backup infrastructure? It's not only backup, of course. You see over here, there's a Veeam CDP proxy. So the guy who does all the work, in fact. It can be the same as your backup server, for instance, and this proxy is doing more or less everything. So my backup server is, in this case, I would say, between quotes, heavily charged. So we got a server, we have to choose it. We have to choose where to have that special file, that cache. It's going to be my Veeam drive, the V drive, and the cache size is being limited at 10 gigabytes. Yeah. And over here, there is more or less the thing that I mentioned. For most of the Belgian companies, it will be okay. So what we suggest is to keep 1 gigabyte of every protected VM disk. Now, of course, if you're going to start talking about thousands and thousands of virtual machines, then if every virtual machine has about 2, 3, or 4 disks, then this thing kind of gets big suddenly. Certainly, if you know that the cache size needs to be scaled up. Very likely your disk needs to be fast as well. That's mainly the reason why we say the top 5%. Once again, if you do not have a lot of virtual machines, then the top 5% of not a lot can be a lot more than just 5%, of course. Traffic rules, that's the thing that I mentioned about the I/O throttling. It is more or less just like any Veeam component in the meanwhile. We can do throttling as well. The review, over here you see there is Veeam CDP and a transport policy. It already exists. I'm not going to click again on finish because it will take a minute. Then in the inventory, you can see I got 3 nested ESX. So it's not the fastest environment. So I got a virtual environment with some sub-hosts, 1, 2, and 3. I have a few virtual machines on ESX3 that I'm replicating or CDPing to ESX1. How to deploy those drivers? Actually, it is quite simple. If you did not yet install the I/O filter, then it's over here. You just click the button Install I/O filter. It will do some processing. Keep in mind that you'll need at least 16 gigabytes of memory. So if you want to do a small tryout on a few ESX hosts, 16 gigabytes of memory is obligated. Yeah? Funny side remark, if you have, for instance, a NUC device that you want to use as a test and there is 16 gigabytes of memory in it, it's being rounded up by VMware to 15.9, and 15.9 is not at least 16. So that's a small side remark. I had to notice this myself, and I was kind of frustrated at the beginning that I did not have enough memory available. Also, there is a minimum supported version of VMware. I think by heart, if you're at 6, it's okay. And I used to be just below. So it didn't work out for me to test out the beta version. So now I updated my infrastructure. I got V11 installed and everything worked as a charm because it was really like click right install. It does some processing and that's it. You can do some adding to CDP policy, but I'm just going to pick out the one that exists already. If my clicks work, okay, my clicks work. So I got a CDP of a small and a tiny Linux virtual machine. Why small? Because it will allow me to do quick processing for demo. It goes really fast. If I take huge machines with plenty of changes, it might, for demo purposes, not be the best use case. Certainly not because I run on nested environment. So what we do is we take out CDP small, we just give it a name. We could use replica seeding, network remapping and stuff like that. I just keep everything as it is by default because it's not my intention to have other IP addresses on my other ESX server. I pick out the Linux, the very small machine. I could do as well, as I mentioned before, use the tagging mechanism, and keep in mind you can use the combination, tag combinations with the AND component at this point in time at version 11. My clicks are going really slow. It's very, very strange to click and wait 1 second until it appears. We got a host where it resides. It has been put in resources for some reason, and we're going to push it into the VM folder. This is the data store where it's going to be pushed in. That's why it's not important what kind of a storage is underneath. Keep that in mind. We do cross vendor. We are completely vendor independent. Source proxy, in this case, it's automatically is perfect for me because I just have one. It's the same for my target because I run on limited environment. And I'm going to use a suffix like _CDP replica just to keep things visible and readable. I got a schedule, which is every 2 minutes. Keep that in mind because it will be kind of important for the remaining of the day demo of the VDRO. So we got 2 minutes every time, and it can be less. We can just do it over 10 seconds. I think the minimum is 7 seconds to keep things realistic. Short-term retention is also a possibility, and we also have the possibility of having the application-aware processing. You already see the guest processing appearing over here. Keep in mind, it is very likely that your SQL database is not going to love Veeam anymore, as you're going to play around with the VSS writers every 7 seconds. Just remain realistic with the application-aware processing. But indeed, you got 2 kinds of schedules. It's like the long-term schedule and the application consistent schedule. It's crash consistent, it's the blue things. It's like during business hours, you do crash consistent because there is just too much IO. You cannot handle it within time, but over the night, you still want to just have the application quickly, application consistent, in order to fail over application consistent. Now, that was it. How does it look like in VMware? If I'm not automatically logged off. Oh, it's off. Cool. Let's quickly power on because it's required for the rest of the demo. So indeed, we got one. It is at ESX3, so the third one, and it's being replicated automatically at ESX1 or replicated CDP'd, whatever you want. So Veeam does all the work. It kicks in every 2 minutes, as you noticed, and I do not need to do anything at all. SLA, you can say 100%, RPO, 2 minutes. So everything is in place. Now the failovering things, it can be done by Veeam. If I'm not mistaken, click CDP. Oh, I need to go to the machine. Unless it's because it's off, didn't notice it was off. Come on, click. It's still appearing off over here. I can create my failover plan over here, but I'm not have no intentions, in fact, to do a failover plan because I'm going to use VDRO. I'm still making mistakes with the old name. Thierry, so far, any questions that did pop up?
No, it's quite calm in the chat.
It's too calm, not alive. But it's okay. Perfect. I know from the past, just interrupt me if questions appear. I know from the past, Veeam availability orchestrator. So yes, indeed, on purpose, the old name used to be a very different or a difficult topic. Reason why? Because we always said, well, our customers are too small, and in the early days, I would say, you needed to have Enterprise Plus licenses in order to use Veeam Disaster Recovery. And that's not the case anymore. They did change the approach. And in the meanwhile, well, while everybody is being gradually, I would say, converted to VUL licenses, it's not an issue anymore because you've got a complete stack of functionalities in order to jump on Veeam Disaster Recovery or Orchestra. So in a quick summary, I will do some marketing-ish slides, and afterwards we will jump into a small demo, because actually the product, it is one of the most complex products that Veeam has. Why? Because you can start combining and those data labs and network remapping and specific programs, even steps into the product. You can do, well, actually, you can do quite a lot. You can do even Netapp replication, so storage replication with it. So if you have by accident all those components, then it really becomes a very complex product. So my advice is, if you install it as a beta or a tryout or a trial key, just install it, but start with something small, something that you master completely from Veeam backup and replication. For instance, based on the backups. Yeah. Then try it out with replica. Then modify it towards the replica with IP retranslation, for instance, and stuff like that. So make it complex, but do it step by step. That's the biggest takeaway for today. Then how to position that at clients? Well, clients should know that actual disasters could happen. If you think a client is, and the client is convinced that it's very safe in his data center against an airplane that is going to crash, and certainly if you're in the neighborhood of Zaventem, then he very likely has built his data center in the basement. Well, guess what? In the basement, you can still have water that enters the building. I know it's still a disaster. It's very worst case scenario, but that actually happen. And the most stupidest things will happen with the most biggest consequences in point of money. So Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator is in fact the insurance that you have if really something really bad happens, that you got something to jump towards another data center or jump to your secondary, in fact. The most common, honestly, I think the most common failure would be hardware failure. Yeah, if you got some ESXs, it's fine. You got, imagine you got just 3 ESX hosts running plenty of virtual machines. One goes down, what happens with the other? Of course, an inside disk crashes, or the memory, or the main board crashes as well. And then you just got one left over. It cannot handle all the load, so you need to fail over towards the other location. It's like Murphy's law. Things and bad things happen. Another thing that is quite, well, it's not funny, but it happened in the past. If you have a fire, for instance, in one building, make sure that your secondary building is far away enough from the first building. Yeah, that's the main thing that could happen with the parking lot data center. You know, data center one, parking lot, and another data center at the other side. Make sure it's far enough away. Ask to the guy that do the checkup on the fire dispatching to make sure that if one building is being sealed because of a fire, that you can still access and run operations from the secondary building at the other side of the parking lot. I know big companies, they don't have that issue, but if you are a smaller company, then it might be an issue because they just seal off all buildings, and then you're completely stuck, of course. Let's jump into some more numbers. But this is, for me, it was quite funny because I investigated those disasters in the past. British Airways, human error, and they went down for 24 hours. I think the human error is being mentioned over here, but it actually was if I'm not mistaken, a UPS device where the cleaning guy, just put down the electricity, and it was not the UPS that went down, but the outgoing current of the UPS, which just shut down, click bang, just like that, the complete data center. So it is one single click, and it is quite a lot of money that was lost within 24 hours. And of course, a big, how do you say in French? It's like blush, een dikke buil on your ego, in fact. I would guess an IT manager would not be very happy with a disaster just like that. We can talk about examples for hours, but I think the most current disasters with big impact that happen nowadays are those crypto lockers. They just enter your environment and they mess up everything. CDP is not necessarily the biggest or the best approach to recover from it. Yeah, because if you have one thing that is being encrypted, it's being replicated towards the other side within seconds. So it's being encrypted also within seconds at the other location. Therefore, you need backups. And Veeam Disaster Recovery can help you with that as well. So I'll explain that how it's being done. Environments, that's the common thing, that's the message that you need to keep pushing towards end clients. In fact, they get bigger, they get more complex, and they really are changing faster and faster. Yeah, they go. Yeah, I've seen environments being changed, and they said to me, well, our change rate is not that big, but we just throw away virtual machines and we have to reprocess things in another way just to change with the business. It happens. So it means that if you have a static plan for a disaster in infrastructure point of view, then it means also that you used to have virtual machine 1 and it's being tested and stuff like that, is being signed off, and the plan is valid. 1 year later, you want to test the plan, and VM1 is just non-existing at this point in time because it's being cut down into pieces, and it's now VM 10 and 11 and 12, for instance. And 12 is being changed to VM 13 in the meanwhile. So things are really getting complex because everything is changing so fast. That means somebody needs to deep dive the whole time in those disaster recovery plans, in fact, and keep them up to date. We have a solution for it, a disaster recovery orchestrator, which does actually everything for you. I will show you the how it's being done in a demo. So, oh, the light went out. Okay. So disaster recovery orchestrator version 4. There used to be version 1, which was actually, I would say, really a version 1. Version 2 was a really good version because they changed the approach, they changed the way how it's being installed. Version 3 included the Netapp orchestration, and that is really a big hit, and the backups as well. And version 4, we are now, it's completely built in with everything what you want or what you need, in fact, in terms of CDP and stuff like that. These are the marketing slides. I'm more or less going to skip those. It makes sense. You want something that where you can rely on that it's going to work. Yeah, it does not. If you have something that might work, that's not good enough. You must be sure that it's going to work, and we can prove that things are actually working with those plans and with certain application support as well. So we have specific steps that can check on Exchange SQL and stuff like that. If the steps do not exist, you can do your own scripting. Imagine you got some kind of a tropical database with Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestration, where you can insert some, for instance, PowerShell instructions to make your own checkup of your own exotic database. Yeah? It's also RESTful API supported, so you can do your own programming with it. And everything is being linked with the Veeam backup and replication server. Keep that in mind, that both need to be up to date at that point in time. I updated my Veeam backup and replication server, I think 2 days ago, with the email from Gostev that everybody should have had if you're subscribed to the forums with the cumulative update. Well, it means that you need to redeploy the agents, and it's not an awful lot of work of Veeam Disaster Recovery for the VBR. Right-click and update. We also, and this is quite important to know, we also, for the bigger environments, I would say, we also work with scopes. What are scopes? Well, it is actually giving the ability for some power users or some IT guys to do their own thing. So you as a super admin, I would say, super admin decides what should be processed, what should be done, what is the minimum things that a plan should contain. And then you give it away or you make it available for the scopes underneath. Meaning you have an administrator that is completely independently working at, I would say, a remote office. And he can, based on your plan, continue with the, I would say, the blueprint of the plan and continue to refine and the steps and the virtual machine and, for instance, add some additional steps in the plan specific for his environment. Because it's not like, it's more like the big companies that have really widespread environments. But one IT team cannot know everything from all the other teams from over the globe. So it can be cut down into scopes. Everything is web-based. So there is no console to be installed. You just need a URL from Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. And it's pretty easy to use. Automated testing is possible. Keep in mind automated testings of backups, automated testing of Netapp replication, automatic testing of replicas. So it will create that kind of data lab approach that I draw earlier. But for CDP, that mounting was not possible. Yeah, it's still not possible within Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestration. So with CDP policies, the only thing is go, fail over, fail back, commit with a fail, permanent failover and stuff like that. So it's not booting everything up in a lab. So I'm not going to lie on that part. Automated testing is foreseen for backups, replicas, and storage replication. On the other hand, you can have a report, and I will show that later on, once again in the demo. You will have a report that will warn you things are not that okay. They will show you a warning or even an error, and I'm going to provoke that error. I will make sure that things are not okay before we do an actual test. Main message, I love it when a plan comes together. It's from Hannibal Schmidt from the A team. Well, if you have a plan, it's good. If you have a plan that is always up to date, it is better. If you have a plan that is even tested and up to date, well, that's simply perfect. And that is the thing that Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrating is doing for you. As a partner, yes, you can still do plan, make some money out of it, I would say. Why? Because the client will very likely not have the competences of knowing their complete network, knowing their complete infrastructure, knowing Veeam completely, knowing all the functions within Veeam, knowing Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. And on a licensing perspective, I think Thierry will handle that later on. It is also pretty neat because you can license everything together, for instance. I will quickly jump a little bit further on the mechanisms. Now, just to give a broader overview, this is how Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator is going to handle with the replica. So it's the old replica job, keep that in mind. So we got some workload over here, we got some workload over here, whether or not it's smaller. Yeah? And we have a Veeam Disaster Recovery agent. That's the thing that I mentioned earlier on. We need to deploy that on our components. So on the Veeam backup and replication server, it will be done automatically. Huh? Right click, go. If you have, and that's not being pushed at this slide, but if you have multiple VBR servers in multiple locations, you will have multiple agents, of course. And you will very likely have one single enterprise manager, which will contain also that agent. At that point in time, all those VBR servers are connected to the enterprise manager. So you will just need to push one single agent, and from over here, things are being spread towards the other machines. So it's a really lazy approach. Once again, lazy administrator, good administrator. Yeah? You have possibility to back things up, but also use the replication mechanism. You got replica VMs running over here. In a disaster recovery, you got the same approach. You can do an instant VM recovery, and even with not Veeam availability orchestration, but Veeam disaster recovery orchestration. So you can orchestrate that instant recovery to this ESX. Not going to cover that use case today, but it's still.
Yes, then there is a small question if it will be possible with the disaster recovery orchestrator to have the VBRs not joined into a domain.
I think everything needs to be domained. Yeah.
Because it's a best practice for VBR, not.
It's actually not a best practice to put it out a domain. Actually, it's a best practice to keep a backup domain. So a subdomain that is not talking is just one-way traffic towards the domain. But for Veeam availability orchestrator, the first step, and it's not possible to continue with the installation for this server, it needs to be in a domain. That's step one. And then the communication goes towards the other servers, of course. In my example, in my demo environment, everything is in the same domain, so it's pretty easy. But keep in mind, it used to be in the early days, I think, to push away Veeam from the domain. But actually, you can use perfectly a subdomain specific for backups with all the user accounts over there. And I know it was a discussion that being done already plenty of times, but actually, if you have one-way trust, for instance, between your domains, then there is very likely no harm if you have intrusions in the environment. Of course, if you keep everything open and two-way trust, then it's a done game. Huh? This example over here. Anything else, by the way, Thierry? Sorry.
No, that's the only question for Nico.
So if you have multiple sites and you're doing like an active-active approach, then you will need a active-active orchestrator server at left side and at the right side. Mainly reason why, yeah, because if you fail over from one side towards the other side and there is no disaster recovery orchestrator, then you have kind of an issue. Yeah? You can always have a disaster recovery server at the third side, but I would say it's not a very good approach because something can happen with the lines and then nobody knows who is in what state and stuff like that. So it might not be a perfect idea. But also this one, if you keep in mind, Veeam disaster recovery orchestrator needs to be at the DR side, and you run in active-active, then actually both sides is also not the active side, but also the DR side. Makes sense now. Then active-passive makes sense, or the most sense, and it's the easiest to understand. You have production and you have your DR side. At the DR side, you have your DRO server and the VBR server. Makes sense, complete sense. Many to one, this typical setup for robo offices. You could have multiple proxies that do replication toward the main side, I would say. At the main side, you have VDRO, and also the backup server, who does very likely is going to host those VBK files as well, and the backups that are being used by a copy job, but also the replication over here towards the virtual machines. So you just have a many-to-one. This one is not the main side or not only the active side, but also the DR side. And then, of course, it makes sense to install this server over there. Architecture overview is more or less like the same. So keep in mind on the Netapp, it's not being mentioned it's being mentioned specific on the Netapp. We have the possibility to have that snap mirror ability and to monitor that as well. Keep in mind, yes, before the question pops up, Thierry, now it is Netapp. Let's say that another vendor was very jealous at the point in time that we released the Netapp. Why Netapp is first? The reason is pretty simple, because Netapp asked it, and they said, well, we're going to push some developers at your side and your developers at our side to get familiar with each other. And then over there, you go for the replication mechanism within the Netapp. So we got that up and running as a first step, I would say. Very likely other vendors can or could follow. It's not a guarantee, because the CDP mechanism is working pretty good. So also there, I do not have a ball to look at the future. Yeah? Not going into details about the data labs, because we're not going to cover that, because it's not being kept alive with the CDP mechanism. But yes, you can make, as you see, Veeam is pretty easy to deploy, pretty easy to handle, but you can make things, as you can see in the architecture over here, you can make things complicated with a lot of additional components. And this part is for Thierry. It's all about licensing. I'm not touching licensing. Any other questions in the meanwhile?
Not in the chat at the moment.
Okay, so I'm jumping into my Veeam recovery orchestrator. You can log in as a current user, and you clearly see, just too late, back. I'm logged on already. Hang on. Log out. Getting there. Hang on. I know the screen from time to time is blurry, but that's because of my connection to home. You can see over here, user at domain or domain dash user. This is the reason why it needs to be domain joined, because you can log in as a user from the domain and only from the domain. And it's also being kept in mind with those scopes, by the way, if you're going to limit things for other super users, I would say, or IT power users, that's also within the domain, of course. Main overview, this is just the green bullets when things go good, wrong, or not being tested. So I kept on purpose things that are not being tested. If you want to jump into the configuration, that's on the top right. So that's kind of, as everything is a web GUI, everything is for a lot of people new. I'm not going to loop over everything, but you can see I got healthy agents. I got a vCenter that is connected. I don't have storage systems, so in this case, Netapp. I have no storage plans linked to that storage system. I have a valid license, and I can see my consumption of that license. If I'm going to jump into these agents, you can see that I have, if I make it a little bit bigger, I have a Veeam backup and replication server, but you see between the brackets, it's being managed by the enterprise manager, which is below. Yeah? So I linked, in fact, the agent to the enterprise manager, and therefore I'm also covering my backup server. So you see over here, if I do an update, just as I did 2 days ago, server version, you will see that there is a higher version. Then you need to very likely going to repair, and you just click on the button repair, and it's going to connect towards that backup server and going to repair that agent that is running over there. Keep in mind, if you have a backup server and you click on the backup server only, you see the role, the server type, backup server. and you click on repair, it's going to say, hey, I cannot do that because it's connected to Enterprise Manager. Then, well, easy way is click on the Enterprise Manager and click repair. You can uninstall things, but install components, additional components as well. I got one vCenter, which is over here. At the beginning, and I keep it on just on demo purposes, it will throw up a pop-up every time telling you what is the purpose of this screen, what can you do, and what's the basic function of it. So it gives you a really short summary. Things I have mentioned in the past already. You can have steps within a plan. One big master plan consists of multiple steps. You can add and remove those steps. There are by default always 2 of them, and you can add multiple additional steps. So you see over here, there are by default exchange steps. Verify that one single email box, for instance, on the purpose of checking actually that not only the virtual machine is up and running, but actually the services that it's going to provision, do they work in fact? Do they actually, can you get into the mailbox or a shared mailbox, for instance, to read out things after a disaster recovery? Very important to check those things if you're testing out your disaster recovery plan. Roles and scopes I mentioned as well. So now I'm in an admin scope. I got everything within the same admin scope, but I could make a semi-admin scope, for instance, who does only have right on a subset of the environment, for instance. No? Main message for today, if you want to start playing with it, it is actually best practice if you want to play around with the backups and the plans that you make for backups and replicas, traditional replicas, then it's a very good idea to go into your VMware environment and use this system of tags. First of all, tag your servers, tag your environment. Say this is my this is the actual production server, for instance, and then you tag it with production, or you go and say, this is my DR server. This is really important. Why is this important? Because you will tell me afterwards that it is utterly annoying to have this tagging functioning. If you think first about the tagging, everything on Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator is being based on tags. So if you have a subset of ESX hosts that are using tags as a disaster recovery, then it's known. If you link your vCenter, then it's being captured immediately. And that being captured process is a process that runs every 4 hours. So if you forget about the tagging and you link your vCenter, for instance, then it will take 4 hours very likely after you use the tag. So if you're running a proof of concept with this product, first tag, then install the Orchestrator, then go ahead with the linking of the vCenter and stuff like that. Because otherwise, you will install the product, start thinking about tags, tag them actually, and then discover that you have to wait until the next day until those tags appear in Veeam Availability Orchestrator. Then let's jump to the actual plans. So I got a few plans. They're all disabled at this point in time. I got gold only based on tags and based on backups. So I got a virtual machine that is being based on tags. It's being tagged as gold, and I do plenty of stuff with it. What we are going to do, because the main subject or the first subject was CDP, I'm going to create new plan, and live demos always go wrong, so don't blame me. I got one thing that is going to go wrong on purpose, so we will discover that. So we got the perfect plan for take data. all goes wrong, what to do. Stein and Thierry. And then the contact email is me@me.com. For some reason, contact telephone number, keep in mind those things will appear in the reports. So if you do stupid things over here, like I'm doing, they will be visible on the reports as well. We're going to use the CDP replica. You see the difference, regular replica or the traditional replica job, the storage replication and the restore or the backup restore operations can be done as well. We will base our thing on CDP replica. This is the advantage of CDP. You do not need necessarily tags because I can pinpoint my backup and replication CDP policy. Yeah? All those other things, well, those are being based on tags. Yeah? So if you don't tag your environment, this will be completely empty, and that's pointless to say that you first need to tag and then go for it. The groups, you can check how many VMs are in there. Well, I got just one. It's my Linux small machine that I mentioned earlier on. I'm going to use that. This is very important. What do you expect to do when something goes wrong? If something goes wrong and you have a plan with 100 virtual machines, for instance, do you want to halt the plan, fix the issue, and then continue? Or do you actually want to let go the plan, continue for forever? If even half of the virtual machines fail, so be it, but at least you get 50% of the virtual machine. It is good for common virtual machines. If you do a failover of, for instance, Active Directory group or a Exchange or SharePoint group, it might be the best practice to halt the plan. Yeah? Then over here, I told you before, it is the goal to have two processes. So it's going to process the CDP replica one last time, and is going to check the VM heartbeat. Well, I got a very good advice based on the CDP. It is, where is this? Shut down the source VM, because actually, otherwise you will end up with a double IP. So it's not a bad idea to shut it down first before you boot up the virtual machine at the secondary location. This is something that I do on purpose. I will say, and keep that in mind, I defined my policy at 2 minutes. Over here, it's 15 seconds. I'm saying, well, I want everything to be okay within 15 seconds. 15 seconds is less than 2 minutes, so it will very likely not be the situation I actually wanted it to be. Oh, sorry, these are the templates. You can modify your templates within just a word, and then you modify, you put your logo in there, you put your default comments. For instance, what should appear in the reports? It is, for instance, the number of the guardian, the number of the fire dispatch, the number of whatever the receptionist who can open the door, for instance, and stuff like that. That needs to be in your template of your company. Scheduling, we will make a plan definition report. So what's in the plan readiness check. You will see later on what is in the check, because it's supposed to be failing now. And now this plan is being pushed and being finalized, I would say. It's going to create that check for once. So this is just a quick summary of all my settings. So it's creating the plan, creating also the first check, and it's saying, well, the check failed. What did go wrong? I can check on my reports. It's not a big surprise. I will download the plan. I will take a quick look at the perfect plan for take data. And it will say somewhere, if I say scroll down, so it's my backup server, it's in the scope, it's being licensed, or everything is fine. And over here you see a warning. What is the warning? It is something being linked with the CDP job or policy and the backup server. It is linked to that Linux machine. If there were multiple machines, then it would have been a bigger list. Yeah? And over here, you will see that actually the SLA is being linked. It's not okay, because the CDP policy is 2 minutes, and it's not the RPO of is set at 15 seconds. So it will never be achievable on the settings that you've just set. Main purpose, of course, is to modify it. And then now I need to check and triple check where to click. So it was 2 minutes. If I say now, well, 3 minutes is just fine. And we just go over summary, finish. It's not being verified. So I click on the readiness. It will generate myself a report, and it should go in green. I say should go, but live demos always fail. Still not okay. Oh, hang on. Click back on the plans. See, that's why I kind of hate live demos or love, because it put the right amount of positive stress on the things. It's still that Linux machine. The warning is okay. I got an issue with apparently with my CDP job. So the SLA is not okay. So things that were running perfect yesterday are not running that perfect today.
Then there is another question.
Yep.
The question is if it is possible to automatically have different IPs on the DR side in case you lose the layer 2 connection between them.
You can do a retranslate of the IPs. Yes, it was during the creation of the plan. It was actually one of the sub steps that I actually skipped because of my environment is way too simplistic to do that. Actually, if I jump. I'm thinking it will be easier if I take out a complete new plan. I cannot be blank. Damn. So the CDP, I take once again this one, all the plan, new template. You can. Yes, you can, but I'll come back. Write down from. Just send me from who it was, and then I'll pinpoint that later on. So okay, this will fail forever because my SLA is not being met. Reason why, just discovered, because apparently I had and it's still growing, it's syncing in fact, because my virtual machine was off, and that's why my SLA cannot be met. And it's still syncing, of course. Now, how to launch this plan? Well, first of all, it cannot be disabled. Therefore, you need to enable the plan. Now it's being enabled, but it's not okay. It's not going to pass very well. If we're going to launch a plan anyhow, then you always, and that is the funny thing, you always need to put your password in. Yeah? Why is that? Because it needs to be verified that you're actually an administrator that has sufficient rights, and that is actually knows what it's doing. What kind of a restore are we doing? We're going to pinpoint the short-term restore points, not the long-term, because we are only interested to quickly and fast failover. The restore point, just pin out the latest one. And then the readiness check, well, it's going to check anyhow. Not sure that it's going to work because not everything is verified and there is still one warning remaining. There it goes. It's in use. The perfect plan for tech data is being running. There are no pre-plans apart from the licensing check. You can see over here, the Linux small is being processed. We are going to check the licenses, that's Veeam stuff. We're going to check the shutdown of the source. So if all goes well, I did have this one enabled, so launched earlier on. Now it's off again. So it went from attempt 1 out of 2. And now it's running my CDP replica. So it's going to process, and let's keep that in mind, the warning. It's going to process once again the replica, and then it's going to detect that actually the replica is in a good state. And from over there, it's going to very likely reconfigure the machine and then power it on. So this might take some time because it was not in the perfect state and it's still syncing, in fact. If something goes wrong, well, actually the plan can be halted. Over here, the plan can be halted. And if you have something like the failover is now being done, so the machine, so the CDP replica machine is becoming live, then it still needs to be committed. And at that point in time, you will have another launch and it will say run. Then you have to enter once again your password and it will say commit. Yes, I want to commit on the failover, or I want to turn it back on the fail back. Yeah? So it means that we started the failover, but it's not needed anymore. So I need to bring back the machine as soon as possible. So fail back, once again, if the fail back is being done, you need to commit that the fail back is actually the state that you want the machine to be residing on. If something goes wrong, there is some kind of a reset. And the reset, the only purpose for the reset is if there is a mismatch on the state. How can you have a mismatch? I will give you some examples. Unlikely going to happen. You're running a plan, and once it's in some kind of a state, you just delete the plan, or you start mishmashing things with the CDP policy over here, and you start failovering here as well. And then you get a mismatch of a state. So it failed at this point in time, but it makes sense because my machine was not in the perfect state. Over here, the IP is not, and it will be skipped. Okay. Completed with a warning, which is the warning because the SLA was not met. And this machine, so the Linux small is being shut down and it's being replicated over here. Perfect. Let's jump back to this launch and let's continue. So over here, I need to push in my credentials and commit on the failover or just failback and then commit on the failback state. Finish. Voila, permanent failover. This is the new state. So actually, something went wrong and I failed over, period. That's something that happened. So if one of my ESX was down, I was able to perform this operation and my small Linux machine is up and running again. For my part, I would say, unless there are still remaining questions, I'm not going to process the complete cycle and bring it back. But from my part, the process is still the same, the steps are still the same, and the reports are still being generated. That is really important. The reports will help you on documenting everything. So for instance, over here, I have an execution of the plan, the perfect plan for tech data, which is now in a failover state, and this is the actions that were processed. So you will see that the virtual machine is being processed towards the other location and stuff like that. So that's really important to know. We do the documentation as well. If you do that on a backup perspective, so for instance, for this gold only machine, the good thing about this is, yes, oops, misclicked. Yes, you can run on tests in that isolated environment. You can test how much time does it take to boot up the environment and stuff like that. Does everything work, yes or no? On CDP, at least for now, not yet. So Thierry, remaining questions?
None at this moment, or none additional.
No. I'll quickly stop sharing. I know by default it is a complex product. It looks a little bit also like complex and like a mishmash of whatever, but it is actually a mishmash of whatever. So you got everything bundled in one product. That makes things complicated. So you need to know from everything.
Okay. I don't see any more questions coming in at this moment.
Ah,
oh,
on the same target VM. Ooh, there is indeed a question.
Yeah, I see it.
I would say, can we combine a VM replica and a CDP on the same just to have history and continuous data protection? It's a very good idea. I did not yet test it. And I was going to ask you about the use case. Why should you do that? But you give the perfect hint as well to have a history and the continuous data protection. Keep in mind, CDP, if you have the ability to do both, keep in mind the CDP is just for those critical machines that you need as soon as possible and that are more or less have the latest state and the latest data. If you really want to have history, I would say just use backups, for instance. It's not a bad idea to have a backup of a virtual machine. But it's a good idea. I'm going to be... I do not know, can I get... I'm going to chat in private to get an email from the guy. I'm going to try this out. I never thought about it.
Okay. I think if no more questions are coming in, we had a small break in mind, but as I see the time is going along, maybe we can simply continue. I don't know, Steen, you had to leave early. If you...
Yep, I'll be leaving early. I'll try to connect from within the car. If there is a remaining question, I'll guess I will hear that. Okay.
Okay. I'll try to share my screen. Do you see my slides? Or, I'm not sure. Charlotte, can you confirm my slides? Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so a small part about licensing now. In fact, Veeam has, let's say, 3 licensing models. And the first one I want to just briefly touch, because it's a completely separate program, is rental licenses for Vcsps. So it's a separate partnership also, but the disaster recovery orchestrator is also available within the rental licenses. And Veeam is, for those who know VMware, Veeam is a little bit more flexible about the rental licensing. So the first question you have to ask is who is doing, let's say, 99% of management at the customer. And if that is you as a reseller, you can also use rental licenses on-prem at your customer site. So it could be to your advantage to simply use rental licenses at your customer if you do, let's say, 99% of management at that site. And the Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator is available also within that model. It's the most flexible model because it's just use the software, and at the end of the month we have a reporting to do. Where for the Disaster Recovery Orchestrator, we simply report the number of VMs you have within the different Veeam products, and pay only for that amount of licensed instances, let's say. If you're not doing all the management, so if your end user or your customer is also taking part in management of his backup infrastructure, or it's simply a choice of the customer to simply say, no, I want to be the owner of the licensing, then we still have two other possibilities. That's the, let's say, the perpetual part, which is socket-based licensing, or the subscription part, which is the well-known VO licensing, Veeam Universal Licenses. What consists of Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator? It's only available, let's say, in a per workload licensing model. Socket licenses at this moment within Veeam is only available for the products like VBR, Veeam Availability Suite, and Veeam Backup Essentials. And it's so only available for the virtual machine workloads on premise. So let's say there's a good chance within a few years, let's say, we will no longer have perpetual socket licensing at Veeam, and everything will be a Veeam Universal license. It's the most flexible licensing. You simply buy a bunch of instances, and you can use it for any workload you want. So the Veeam Universal licensing, it's available for everything from Veeam Backup and Replication, Veeam Availability Suite, Veeam Backup Essentials, and of course all the new features within the Veeam offerings are also only available through the Veeam Universal licensing. Think about the Veeam agents from Windows to Linux to Mac. The Veeam availability for Nutanix is also only available through the VO licensing. Cloud workloads, anything like that is all VO. There's still a few products which are not VO but subscription based. That's still Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, which is a user-based licensing subscription model. Veeam Availability Orchestrator is still mentioned on the slides, but that should be Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator, which is also subscription but not VO based. The management pack, and of course the Veeam backup solution for containers, is also a subscription model, but not in the VO licenses. How can we then buy or license the Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator? There are two possibilities. We can still buy a standalone subscription. It's a subscription, but you can buy them in a package of 10 licenses. And you can simply choose the number of VMs you want to protect. It's the most expensive of offering, but you're not forced to license all your VMs. If you have Veeam Universal licensing for your Veeam Backup and Replication product side, then you can opt for the Disaster Recovery Pack. The one thing is you need the same amount of Disaster Recovery Pack licenses as you have Veeam Universal licenses. So you need to protect all your VMs there. But it's much cheaper. If you compare prices in list price in US dollar, you have, let's say, $31 for one VM, while with the standalone a la carte, you are up to $155 for one virtual machine. Since the 1st of May for the DR pack, there is a slight change. People previously, let's say between the beginning of this year and the 1st of May, you could also use the DR or buy the DR pack if you had per socket licenses, but that's done. So people really need to have full licensing for buying the disaster recovery pack. Something that a lot of people do not know is that if your customer really says, "Oh, subscription, I don't like it, but I need VUL licensing," VUL is also available as a perpetual way of buying, but it's quite more expensive. I just put it on the slides to just notice the existence of it for some bigger customers who really want a CAPEX investment and not an OPEX with like a subscription, but it's a possibility. Another thing that a lot of people do not know, it has nothing to do with disaster recovery orchestrator, but Veeam backup application is capable of doing NAS backups. The licensing model is so that you need the licensing, and one instance there gives you the possibility to back up to 500 gigabytes of data from your NAS device. For bigger NAS environments, that can be, first of all, quite expensive and consume a lot of instances, licenses. So we have two possibilities here. If you are on Veeam Backup Essentials, you can buy a NAS capacity add-on there, which is lower priced and equivalent to the VUL instances licensing. There is a minimum of 5 terabytes, and as it's an essential, so it's a small business possibility product, the maximum is 50 terabytes there as a maximum. The advantage of the NAS capacity pack is, of course, that it will take the NAS capacity add-on as a license model. It will no longer consume instances from the maximum of 50 instances you have within your Veeam Backup Essentials bundle. We also have a NAS capacity add-on for the enterprise products, let's say Veeam Backup Application and Veeam Availability Suite. It's always through a special pricing quote from Veeam itself. And let's say there, it's also a price advantage comparable to the VUL licensing model. But there you need, let's say, at least something between 50 and 100 terabyte to start with the NAS capacity add-on normally. And then one more thing, because with Veeam, let's say, pushing people from sockets to Veeam Universal licenses, there are also a lot of questions about migrating them. And yes, it changes a lot. So we are at migration policy 3.0. The details are that you can migrate from CPUs to VUL licenses. It's always a quote from Veeam you will get, and you have, in a pricing perspective, to calculate that you will approximately pay the price of new VUL licenses. Okay, you can have, because it's Veeam quoting, you can have special pricings and special reductions there, but the starting price will be approximately equal to new VUL licenses. But the biggest advantage, and the one a lot of resellers do not know, is that with the conversion, separate from the price you pay for the migration, you get also, or the customer, the end user, will get an out-year discount. The out-year discount is in fact a discount on any renewal of his subscription in the coming years, on the condition that he does renew for the same number of instances he got with the migration. If he buys add-on instances, they will not get the discount. That will be the regular renewal price then. But the instances he got from his migration will get an out-year discount at time of renewal of his subscription. And that can be significant. It depends on the migration ratio on the VM density. The lower the density of his, let's say, VMs per socket he migrates, the lower the discount will be, but the higher the ratio, the bigger the discount on his renewals will be. These discounts vary from, let's say, 10% and can go up to, let's say, around 70%. And he gets that every year or at every renewal time for as long as he stays on the Veeam licenses. So that's the out-year discount is really an important part of the migration selling offer. There were I should staying left, but I don't know if there are any questions at this moment. Okay, no, yeah, there is one question, and it's a good question. Is socket licensing still available? I thought it was only for existing socket customers. No, socket licensing is still available to all customers. What's changed since the 1st of January is that you can't buy for Veeam backup and replication and for Veeam availability suite. New customers can only buy Enterprise Plus level products with production support. So the offering there is a bit the same like Veeam Universal licenses. So if you buy Veeam licensing, in the point of view of Veeam backup and replication, you are at an Enterprise Plus level of products and you get production support. If you look at the socket licensing, since the 1st of January this year, new customers for Veeam can only buy Veeam backup and replication Enterprise Plus socket licenses with production support or Veeam availability suite Enterprise Plus licenses plus production support. For Veeam Backup Essentials, so the smaller environments, there you still have the possibility to choose standard Enterprise or Enterprise Plus editions and basic support. Existing customers can still grow their environment at the same level they have. So if they have Veeam Backup Replication Standard and they want to add sockets, that's still a possibility. Take care with upgrades. An existing customer can upgrade, but the only upgrade possible is to Enterprise Plus. You can't upgrade from standard to Enterprise with socket licensing. Okay. Also know that you can combine socket licenses and Veeam Universal licenses. But at that moment, if you combine both, the socket licenses will only be used to back up virtual machines, and the universal licenses, those instances will only be used for any other workload, being agents, cloud workloads, NAS backup, but never for virtual machines. I don't know if there are any other questions. Maybe on the merge side of licenses, to note, there are two ways to merge licenses. Since version 10, we speak about in portal merges and in product merges, because as of version 10, we can have multiple license files within the product. So in portal, merges are done for the same products. So if you want to combine, let's say you have two license keys of full licenses, those you can combine into one license file. In product, merges are done by uploading two license files within Veeam Backup Application. And that's, for instance, if you want to mix CPU licenses and full licensing. Take care there that the licenses must really have, or the license file must really have the same company as an owner. You can't merge or import two license files with even slight differences within the company name. So take care there. Any more questions? Well, that's all I had to tell you about licensing at this moment. So, but feel free after this webinar to contact us by phone or by email. So if you still have a question, our phone number is 02-583-8310. Of course, you can also send us an email on the well-known email address tdas_software@takedata.be. So.
Okay, then I'll stop the recording.